Good evening, I'm Sylvia Spivey, and welcome to Mercy Neighborhood Ministries 2021 virtual event. We're standing stronger together. We want to invite you to come in and learn more about our mission and the work we do here in North Philadelphia. After a very challenging year, we are standing as a beacon of light and hope here in the city of Philadelphia. Welcome. Mercy is a central part of progress in Philadelphia because our center serves the whole family. We start with childcare from ages 3 to 5, and we have adult education programs that help adults get their GED and complete their high school equivalency. We also have a senior program that supports caretakers, and so the caretakers are able to drop their seniors off here. So we serve the family from ages 3 to 93 here in our center at Mercy Neighborhood Ministries.
Mercy Neighborhood Ministries is an essential part of North Philadelphia because of the enrichment, education, and impactment that we make on the community. The community is very involved in Mercy Neighborhood Ministry, and we want to be the stepping stones and the steps that our children need to succeed in life. Because of the impoverished community that we live in and we are in, we want to make sure that we have the necessary tools that our children need to reach any goals they set out.
The thing that really resonates with me about Mercy Neighborhood Ministries' mission is that we are committed to responding to the needs of the community. Oftentimes, people try to be proactive and create a sort of once and for all answer to the problems in the community, but we respond to what the community expresses as their needs. We respond to what we see as needs in the community, and that really resonates with me.
The mission that resonates most with me with Mercy Neighborhood Ministry is the community, the piece that, reach the families, the mothers, the single mother, the impoverishment of the community itself. Being able to give back to the community is a very, very important part of this mission, giving back.
Mercy Neighborhood Ministries will continue to thrive in a post-COVID world. We have served our families and provided them access to testing and to vaccinations. We will continue to provide quality childcare and quality education to this community. And we believe that we've done that throughout the pandemic, and we'll continue to do that after the pandemic is over.
In a post-COVID world that our whole world has changed, how we can survive is continue to do the work that we're doing now and the mission that we know that we are capable of doing. Given the necessary resources to our families and our community, that has stricken through the COVID-19. And because we know this community is an impactful part of the community and continue to give the COVID testing, the vaccination, the reopening policies and plan of action that we have in place, just to continue to outreach to our families and provide them with the necessary resources that they need.
One of the greatest challenges that we face in our community is access, and I think Mercy does a really great job as providing access to this community. People have challenges with access to quality education. There's issues even during COVID. There were issues with having access to testing, so we were able to provide testing. We've been able to provide vaccines and host clinics here at our center. I think that once people have access, then they have answers to the problems that they have in their lives. And Mercy Neighborhood Ministries is committed to providing that access by responding to the community's needs.
The greatest challenges that our community faces is violence. Violence is very, very bad in this community. What we do at Mercy Neighborhood Ministry, we try to continue to give our families the necessary resources they need. Education is their tool that they need to continue to grow and make sure that our families have everything that they need within this community. Education is vital, and more powerful than the violence. So we continue to partner with our partnership as the 39th Police District and other important partners. We will overcome this. We have overcame so much within the 2020, and we're going to continue to do so and making sure that our families and community is a part of that change.
Out-of-school time programming is essential to our work at Mercy Neighborhood Ministries. In recent years, many after-school programs have vanished from our neighborhoods, our rec centers, and our elementary schools. Students in kindergarten through 8th grade have too often been written off and classified as at-risk youth. We aim to change that as we realize that our children are opportunity youth. In 2015, thanks to a pilot grant from the National Recreation Foundation, we enhanced our STEM programming. Over the years, we've collaborated with Penn Charter High School, Temple University, Riverbend Environmental Center, Wisfis Bank, Spark Makers, and even the United States Navy to provide a truly immersive science, technology, engineering, and math experience for our children. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we increased our virtual efforts, and whether our students were learning cloud science with Miss Brenda or participating in robot extravaganza with Spark Makers, we ensured that their learning continued. In addition to the skills our students learn in their classrooms, we value structured physical activity. With Athletics for Opportunity Youth, thanks again to our friends from National Recreation, we partnered with the Starfinder Foundation and utilized Tioga Field in our neighborhood to add soccer programming in the summer of 2019. It was the first time we featured athletics in the history of Mercy Neighborhood, and we plan to return to the field in the summer of 2021. After-school programming and summer camp touch the lives of over 200 students annually at Mercy Neighborhood Ministries. Through an educational, fun, and engaging curriculum, we keep our children safe and prepare them for brighter days ahead. Greg, thank you for joining us today for this event, for Standing Stronger Together. So just wanted to talk to you a little bit about your work in philanthropy and also your interest in Mercy Neighborhood Ministries. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Great. Love to share our stories. That's great. Looking forward to it.
So why do you believe in the mission of Mercy?
I can have a little fun and laugh at that. I can either do it one of two ways. One is quite out of fear. I was educated by the Sisters of Mercy. I went through grade school with them over there in Norristown. And so they'll be looking at me saying, I taught you you're supposed to be a good person and a helpful person. But seriously, they taught me, I like to think that created the groundwork and framework for being a good Catholic and being a kind and generous person. And so they did a wonderful job educating me. I was fortunate to move on and get a career and a business. And now I'm in a position to give back. And I can't think of anything better to do than to support the sisters in the amazing work they do, dealing with people who candidly have a hand that's much more complicated than anything I ever did. And they're just so skilled at doing God's work in both a humble and compassionate way and in a coordinated, smart business way, if that makes sense. And so it's easy for me to support them. I admire them so much.
And in terms of the work that we do in Philadelphia and your knowledge of the needs, the growing needs in Philadelphia, how can Mercy as an organization meet them?
For me, and again, I think it's through the upbringing, everything starts with the family and ends with the family. And raising a family and caring for those loved ones is complicated. So here's a chance to help parents in dealing with keep getting their kids good care during the morning and the day while they're trying to manage their lives and work and all the things that are going on. And at the same time, life's really complicated from the aging process. I went through that with both my parents, and And my mom was there to take care of my dad, but then who was taking care of my mom? And so, it's amazing. It's, again, sort of a brilliant business plan, and it's incredibly compassionate, is working to help the families deal with all components of the process along the way, plus their education components and so forth. It's really a tremendous service to a community that really needs that extra help.
I guess you kind of touched on this, but what inspires you to be philanthropic?
For me, my faith is everything. And anybody asks, I start with my faith and family and those two things, and candidly, I weave them into my business. And I have this very simple motto: do people see Jesus in me, and do I see Jesus in them? And sometimes I'm volunteering and helping, and sometimes I'm just looking to organizations who are fulfilling that mission and that goal. And so it's a kind of a two-step process, but it's really based on my faith and my education I was fortunate to get growing up.
And you funded our garden here at Mercy in honor of your mother. Why do you believe a garden is important to the neighborhood?
I get a big smile because that was such a big deal to my mom. We grew up in a very blue collar neighborhood, very simple. But people would go by and they come by to see my mom's house, our house every day, going on walks, because it just had this long, full frontage of the street flower bed. And people were literally stopping all the time wondering what the flowers. And so even as a kid, I could see the joy that it brought to people just to stop and look at things. And so turns out my mom raised 6 boys. 5 of us are still around, and we're all into the landscaping. We're all passionate about our flowers and our gardens looking good. And the beauty that it brings just cannot be missed. You just kind of can't ignore it. What I thought was really cool was when a year after we did it, and the sisters out there doing a great job making it look so beautiful, other homes started adding plants and flowers. And you walk down the street, and suddenly an area, that an urban setting can be frequently devoid of both color and green and smells. And that garden is like an oasis. And I think hopefully it creates a sense of community and place, welcoming, and also to come into, stop in, see who we are, what we're about. What's this beauty here? And if they see a little bit of God's beauty in nature, maybe then we can also share to them about his beauty and his people.
Well said. Thank you. And what would you say to folks to encourage them to support Mercy Neighborhood Ministries?
And tying into the theme that I'd shared before is that we're pulled in a lot of directions with people looking for ways to help. They're constantly being asked to, charities for this and helping for that. And it's all well intended, but sometimes, again, I'm as a business owner, I put my practical hat on. Where are the areas that are most effective? They're efficient, they're successful. And it's amazing what Mercy Neighborhood Ministries has done as far as effective it is. And it's building on itself. We're adding other locations, and it's become a role model for how to help families succeed in less than ideal conditions, and to empower them so that as time goes on, the base education they're getting and the learning they're going and the experiences. I love talking to Sister about trips that the kids get to go on in the summertime and so forth. Those are phenomenal building blocks. We want to start there. And if we can work on it there and gradually build from there, the chances of overcoming the difficulties of poverty and struggling to make ends meet can be done. And they're just so effective at that. It's amazing.
Thank you. And you said building blocks. That leads into my last question. What do you see, or what would you like to see in the future for our organization?
I would love for the community as a whole in our region to look at what Mercy Neighborhood Ministries is doing, support them and allow for opportunities to do it at other locations, and maybe take what they're doing and look to implement it in other areas, because it's extremely successful. I've been there to tour the facility and to see what's going on. And it's all inspiring. Candidly, it's tear-jerking because you just see these kids getting the basis for a chance to succeed, and the adults that are being cared for, and the interconnection of the seniors and the children. hopefully to expand upon that in other areas that need it, and also to be a model for other organizations that maybe want to implement similar kinds of ideas so that we can collectively overcome the struggles that we're seeing in the urban settings.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to have you join us tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nia Day, and I am the Assistant Director of Philanthropy here at Mercy. Tonight, I have the privilege and honor of introducing our moderator and speaker. Our moderator for this evening is Sandra Clark, who is the Vice President of News and Civic Dialogue at WHYY, the Philadelphia region's leading public media outlet. Clark joined WHYY in 2016 and is a member of the station's executive leadership team. She manages all news operations across radio, television, web, and digital media. She also leads the award-winning newsroom's audience growth and diversification strategies and community engagement initiatives, manages local news partnerships, and partners with the foundations and donor departments on local and national news grants. Clark is a longtime vocal advocate for diversity, inclusion, and equity, and closing the power gap and trust gap between journalists and communities of color. Tonight, Sandra will be interviewing our speaker, who is Dr. Whitney Kaby. Dr. Kaby is a duly trained physician in pediatric and general emergency medicine, health services researcher, and a bioethicist. A 2014 Robert Wood Johnson Clinical Scholar and 2018 Pincus Family Foundation Pediatric Urban Health Fellow. She is now an assistant professor in the Department of Emergency Medicine and Center for Urban Bioethics at the Lewis Katz School of Medicine at Temple University. Dr. Kaby uses participatory action research methodologies to create trauma-sensitive organizations and communities. Dr. Kaby also completed her undergraduate degrees in biochemistry and women's studies at Spelman College, attained her medical degree from the University of Michigan, followed by emergency medicine residency at Carolinas Medical Center in Charlotte, North Carolina, and a fellowship in pediatric emergency medicine, again at the University of Michigan. In addition to her clinical appointment at the Temple University Health System, she is also an attending physician in the Division of Emergency Medicine at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Her research focuses on identifying and addressing the multifaceted and multi-generational traumas faced by residents of low-income communities. Her latest project, TEACH, which stands for Transformative Emotional Academic Community Healing, is piloting a community-driven, trauma-informed model for urban out-of-school time programming centered on social and emotional learning. We hope you enjoy the conversation that they have tonight.
It's such a pleasure to talk to you today, and so thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So much to talk about. A year ago, the world woke up to something that I don't think any of us could possibly imagine, this global pandemic. There's a big question. What's the last year been like for you?
Oh, wow. It's interesting because I think like in some ways I still feel very much in it, like in the eye of it, although eye is not the right word, right? Because that would be calm.
True.
The year it's been challenging. If there's a healthcare provider who says otherwise, then like I want to see their self-care regimen and I will, adopt it fully. And I think especially, being an emergency physician and working in North Philly, we've gone from safety, like the idea of the safety net has morphed, I think, in a way that's been, very taxing. Going from, I think, kind of the almost like feeling like maybe we dodged a bullet in some ways. I know that might sound odd given the depth of the crisis, but understanding what we understand about health disparities, the prevalence of disease in communities that resemble communities like North Philadelphia, it could have been so much worse. I mean, Temple had great outcomes. We had access to, international pulmonary relationships through, that very high quality group that's run out of there that I think made a huge difference in terms of being aggressive about the way they manage the disease, actually making us less aggressive about, doing intubations, putting breathing tubes in and things like that, because that actually wasn't really, didn't end up being beneficial to patients. So there's a lot that I think could have gone quite a bit differently, and that felt good.
Well, I have to say, that's not something I expected to hear,
Oh.
about dodging a bullet and, I mean, how long did it take you all to kind of know what was there?
Yeah, in terms of
the pandemic and,
yeah, well, so how best to answer that? I think, I had a conversation with a friend where we talked about how, at the beginning, there was that kind of narrative like, oh, it's going to be like a bad flu and things like that. And maybe not expecting the level of active mismanagement, I'm going to have to say, from a federal level. So I think it was a little disorienting from a group of people who place a lot of trust in those bodies in terms of still maintaining a certain level of scientific rigor and communication and coordination, which, I think has been, I trained actually as a physician during H1N1, which was, nowhere near as severe, but or when Ebola came around, and the level of support that we received and just the preparedness that we were given access to for something that never actually even manifest on our shores. So I think that we were a little bit behind the curve in large part because there was kind of this expectation of something that didn't really get delivered, unfortunately, by the Trump administration. I don't think that's political to say that. I think that's just facts. And so, even that for, a community like North Philly that is so under-resourced in terms of healthcare, like, being a couple steps behind out of the gate, like that too could have had an exponential impact, but fortunately it didn't. But I think now what we're kind of, dealing with is like, the backlog of people who have been fearful to come in to the hospital or, had stutter steps in their care because of, needing to connect online and not being able to do those things through telemedicine and stuff like that. And so now, we've still, got a fairly active, pandemic still going on. And then we're dealing with, I guess, the implications of all the other pandemics that, low-income African-American communities are at risk, are kind of, I don't think victim isn't the right word, that we're resilient and surviving.
Sure.
And so that's where I think the next phase has been. And so to kind of sum it up in terms of your question, that part is also, it's morally injurious, I think, and especially as an African-American woman, to see my kinfolk, really struggling through this. It's been hard.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned disparities, and particularly in the Black community. And those were all already there, as you noted, and they're even more severe after being, a lot of care has been put off all this time. It's such a big part of your research and your practice, and clearly your orientation. So talk about some of those barriers and those disparities, because there's a lot of disparity talk these days, but what does that look like on the ground?
So, I think that what we're starting to develop language around is the way that racism, poverty, these systemic social ills are injurious. And if it's injurious, it's violence. And if it's violence, then it's trauma. And you can see this in like a bidirectional impact, right? Where trauma has an impact all the way down to the level of your DNA. And it has an impact then on your children and your children's children and so on and so forth. And so, we pull some of that trauma, from Jim Crow and then, tracing it back to slavery, like literally to the moment that we were brought here as a people. And it manifests, right? And then you've got kind of just like the continual implications of the divestment in communities like North Philly, that then also has an impact, I think, both in the way that people distrust, the level of skepticism, I think that, people rightfully have about how well they'll be cared for, how well the system, as a whole will be able to manage and help them through crises. And so, there's just kind of like, this layered impact, I think, that we see. We've gotten through this first wave of people who have been excited early adopters, to the vaccine, for example. And now we're getting into that nugget of people who have real strong misgivings about, receiving a vaccination. And I think that that's, totally rational in some ways, given everything that's happened to us in the medical apartheid that's really been a part of the healthcare system. So, I think, you can tease it all out but when you kind of, bring it all back together, for me, it's trauma. And then the other way that it really manifests is like, interpersonal violence and, the struggle I think that a lot of people have to survive. And, for Philly, a lot of that manifests in gun violence, which is the other big thing that's been a difficult struggle in this past year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's, particularly, on the heels of the protests after George Floyd's murder, there was just this call for reckoning and reform in so many places. What does that look like in the medical field? And is there that same kind of, very strong rumbling happening there?
I don't think to the extent that it needs to be.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about that a lot. That's so interesting that you bring that up.
Mm-hmm.
I want to answer that in two ways. One, that, there's this kind of like, if you're not a part of the solution, an active part of the solution, you're kind of part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we're kind of blind to the degree to which we contribute, because ultimately the job of the physician is supposed to be about, like making people healthier and healing and things like that. But, the job description of the police officer is, to help, to protect, et cetera. And we know that there's a gap, right, for a lot of officers on a structural level. In social work, you can find the same thing, right? Like there's structural barriers to achieving the goal, right? Racism is embedded into so many parts of our culture. And so it would be extraordinarily naive to think that we're not also a part of that. And just our healthcare outcomes, right, really basically demonstrate that we're not doing everything that we need to bring reparations into the healthcare space, and then to advance equity, after, doing the work to repair. And so, I think what that ends up meaning, though, is that, again, there's this kind of like dichotomy between that knowledge and understanding, like the understanding the statistics of it, and then actually embedding that into the spirit of someone who has kind of like, come through a process that on a professional level it's being kind of articulated, like, you are a helper, you are a healer. And I think that's a really hard thing on literally like an individual level for people to kind of rectify, implicit bias and stuff like that in the way that they practice, and how that might be having an impact on people's outcomes. But that's, part of the work that we do through the Center for Urban Bioethics is a lot of work with the med students about identity and, harnessing your bias and, understanding how that might have implications in the way that you practice. So hopefully that we can try to train a generation of physicians that are trying to do things a little bit differently. But it is difficult, I think. And it's hard work for everybody. And then also, I think in the setting of so much more anger, fear, pain, injury, et cetera, it's harder for everyone to stay well regulated in order to bring their best selves to the profession. I don't know, does that answer that question?
Yeah, what you've talked about is just so much systemic work that has to be done, where it's medical schools or nursing schools, or, how people, and to that point, there's also, you've talked a lot about, how we need to see people who look like us to also see better health outcomes. What's your advice actually to young people of color who want to get into the medical field and how they can make a difference? Because I imagine it's not just coming in and wanting to do medical work, but there's also a lot of cultural work that many of them want to do as well.
Yeah, I think this is going to sound weird, but there's like a lot of ways to help that don't require a medical degree. And that's not to put off anybody who that's like their ultimate goal, but in the same vein of what we're talking about, right? Like now that we understand that medical care is really the minor part of what makes you healthy. You know, I think a lot of students, when you really kind of drill down to their goals, it's about, you know, changing things for the culture. It's about making communities healthier. It's about impacting this like legacy of intergenerational trauma that so many of us are working through. And that can be social work, that can be, you know, sociology. It can come in so many different formats. And there's a kind of a primacy, I think, to allopathic medicine in a way that doesn't actually, again, it doesn't really reflect what makes people the healthiest. We need more urban planners of color. You know, we need more folks who want to get into behavioral health in ways that aren't about prescribe, you know, just prescribe, not just, I don't mean it that way, but, you know, that are primarily about pharmacology and prescribing medicines. We need, you know, people that just want to be thought leaders and say, I mean, like, you could get to, I think, some of what we need to from the ethics space, from English degree. And so I think just, you know, trying to be more expansive in our offerings to children. You know, we create these pipelines and then it kind of gets them stuck in these pipelines. And so I actually kind of am like, maybe think about something else.
Yeah.
Even though I'm like, I totally love my job,
Yeah.
but the places that I'm now finding myself, I think most impactful, the places that I think that I'm actually going to have the longest reach, hypothetically, like, you know, they're in community spaces, they're in organizing spaces.
Yeah.
It builds off of the work that I do and the understanding I have of science, but it doesn't necessarily even have to.
Yeah, and it's not unsiloed. I mean, you can't just talk about the health system. There's so many things to connect to it. And I will add, we also say, that's exactly why I said we also need more diversity in journalism, because narratives matter a lot, and what we see and who we see and who we build relationships with matter too.
Yeah.
You know, I'm intrigued about some of your work, and I mean how you combine, you know, social justice and research and business, and I, in my research of you, I saw that you were doing some work around transportation and disparities. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, that was an early set of projects that I did when I first came out here. Where that was really born from was that, you know, a lot of times people can't get home from the emergency department. And they also are in the emergency department because of a delay in care, often related to transportation, right? Like missed dialysis appointments and just missed appointments in general. It goes to that siloed idea that, you know, we've got a lot of sectors that are important to advancing people's health, but it's not easy to get those sectors to have the kind of crosstalk that's necessary. I think though where I'm sitting now is a little bit less on the technical aspect of that and more on kind of, this really kind of comes back full circle to this idea of like, you know, are we maximizing our identity as a helping profession? Because, you know, one of the ways that I think we end up policing patients, and it falls upon those who have less access to transportation. And then, you know, by definition, that's, you know, patients in poverty, you know, minorities, et cetera, is that, you know, often there's just this kind of like time limitation on your service. Like you're 15 minutes late, your appointment is canceled. You missed X, Y, Z number of sessions, like we can't have you back here. And when you understand trauma, when you start to understand how that impacts people's ability to appropriately self-advocate, to self-regulate, to you know, employ what we would consider to be kind of standard like help-seeking behaviors, then you understand that it's way more complicated than that. And you know, if we were able to turn some of that around to say, okay, people who are missing their appointments because they can't, you know, are having trouble connecting those basic dots to get, you know, from point A to point B, are actually those that we need to wrap more care and attention around. You know, I think it would make a big difference, and maybe a more important difference in some of those kind of like technical ideas about like how do we get people from point A to point B that I was interested in early on. So that's probably how I answer that now. To my, if I'm talking to my old self, like
I know, have a conversation with your old self.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that evolution, is actually a good thing. But, most systems, and whether we're talking about health systems or others, we're not built with equity in mind and with anti-racism in mind. Does it have to be blown up and rebuilt, or can you work within what you have?
Wow. I do not have the answer to that. But I probably reference Audre Lorde at least once a day. If my team, if they were in here, they'd be like, oh gosh, here she goes, master's tools. She's gonna say the phrases, but it's so applicable. That is tough. I find, again, so that going to that idea of when we're working with med students, I start with identity. I start with positionality because, at the very least, identifying yourself as someone who has a kind of insider outsider status, right? If you're aware enough to ask that question, then you can kind of hopefully try to see the matrix. You can see the intersectionality of where you're sitting as a person holding a relative amount of power. Some of the students that I work closely with are also underrepresented minority students, and so we share those identities in the way that those sometimes disempower us in those spaces. And I think that does bring a richness to our experience that allows us to connect on certain levels. But then at the same time, we still have all of this privilege that comes from the, I guess, essentially acculturation into white supremacist culture, which is, renamed as professionalism, right? Like that's what that's called, to make it sound like something that it's not, because, the attention, overemphasis on detail, the, commitment to perfection, like all those kind of things are really, I think, a part of adopting certain professional credos, but that are also like very, very much ensconced in some of the things that you're talking about. And so that it's tough because, in a community, for example, I think, like North Philly, where there's only a certain number of tentpole, pillar kind of organizations that are doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of, maintaining the economic stability of the community. It's probably not the right idea to just, blow it all up, right? Like if the hospital wasn't there, like so many people would be out of jobs.
Yeah.
But at the same time, again, kind of getting into the structural, it's again impossible for any system like that to just sit completely, guilt-free in participation in systems of oppression. That's just a reality. I mean, that's not, I don't think anybody is necessarily doing that consciously or willingly, but that's how the world unfortunately is oriented. And I think that healthcare has to grapple with that again, kind of tying back into the question of, are we doing enough? And that's part of the ways that's a tenuous conversation, because to really completely tear it down, what will we be left with? Like, would you have a hospital to go to? I mean, like, that's a big thought experiment to think about how, you would implement anarchy and simultaneously still keep people safe. You know what I mean? Like that's a tough idea. That's a really tough idea. And so I feel more comfortable working from the inside. But then again, it's like, well, I'm a physician, so I'm going to have a hard time probably seeing that version of the future. It's like, that's why I'm like, I need Octavia Butler to bring forth, an Afrofuturist or something like that could probably give me like a simple, like, oh, you should just do this, right? Like that would be the answer. So I don't know.
I'm curious, are these conversations happening on the margins, or has now there been kind of this opening, like we need to have this reckoning, and this is what it looks like? Because in your world, those impacts are life and death, and in so many ways too.
I mean, I think it's a both and. I definitely working in a bioethics center that is explicitly about centering marginalized voices, it feels like we're having that conversation all the time.
So you just chose a place where you can have the conversations all the time.
Exactly. But in speaking to the broader audience, I would say that we're still pretty, far afield of the quote unquote mainstream. and again, I think that's kind of to be expected given where we sit. I guess I would just have to keep going back to that, right? Like it's naive to think that we are really above the structural, because we're not. We're a part of the structure. And, I mean, just from a like a GDP level, like how much of the the I guess force of capitalism is related to healthcare. There's almost no way to disentangle that. Like if that has certain embedded problematic components, then there's money in this space too, right? So that's also going to make some difference. So I think we're working on it, but I would say too, maybe as another indictment, like who's going to be watching this video? I'm going to get removed from all of the professional societies, but we're not really making a big impact on health disparities, right? If the conversation was happening in the way that it was supposed to, then we would be doing better.
There would be a lot more progress there. Yeah. How did you get into your field? How did you know this is what you wanted to do?
Oh wow. I don't know. I mean, I think I was always one of those little kids that was like, I like science. I want to help people. I don't like animals, so I didn't want to be a veterinarian.
So you eliminated all this stuff.
Right, exactly. My parents both kind of came from the chemistry field. They both worked for Dow. So I always was kind of, pushed into kind of the STEM field. And then growing up in the Dow headquarters, like the town that headquarters Dow, I mean, you really got a robust STEM experience if you wanted to, right? Like they put a lot of energy into making their next generation of employees, right? So so I think that kind of like my life has been science in a lot of ways, but I also I remember watching the Anita Hill hearings and just feeling like something about this is not right. And I had the same feeling with the OJ trial, so there was like this feminist budding within me, and I think in high school I had a chance to take some more humanities classes that really allowed that to come out. And then my parents were reformed is how they probably would put themselves, reformed Black radicals. But a lot of the books were still in the house, so I had that justice underpinning through a lot of different mechanisms. And also the church that I grew up in was very, very much about serving the underserved. We did gleaning the fields and week-long outreach to homeless communities. And I was coming from a very sheltered little town in Michigan, but working in DC for weeks to learn those type of things. And so I always had opportunities, I think, to see the world a little bit differently, and that then bled into my experience at Spelman. And we have to take something called African Diaspora in the World, which is history and humanities from a Black woman's perspective. And then that just kind of it just shifted all those things into just this there's writing, there's Patricia Hill Collins, there's all of those things, and it just started to kind of come together. And so for the rest of my time, I've been kind of trying to bring the science and the social science into harmony. So that's always been kind of my orientation and my goal. So ethics is a space where that really, or bioethics is a space where that can really fit pretty comfortably.
And clearly community and people centered is
absolutely.
Can we get back to talking about vaccine hesitancy?
Sure.
You mentioned that earlier. And when you got the vaccine, you said, I'm a Black woman, I'm a Black mom. So I feel like just taking in a lot of people's questions, their concerns, their fears, right? And yet at the same time, you also encountered people who lost family to COVID and still had vaccine hesitancy and still have not gotten their vaccine. So what needs to happen, we seem to have hit a wall in vaccination. What needs to happen?
So I think we have to have a little bit of patience. I think I've said this before, maybe in other spaces with some of your colleagues, that it always seemed a little odd to me that it was if you understand the nature of why people might be hesitant, particularly in, minority, in communities who have experienced medical injustice, let's say, then like this idea that like we're gonna prioritize you, like put you first in line, like that just sound kind of odd on its face. Here's this experimental vaccine, now you go first. That's not wise. And so I think we have to just have a little grace with people as a first step, because when you get pushy about it, that feels coercive. That feels like you're trying to, I think be aggressive, even if that's not the intent. That's probably the way it feels. And I think the other big part is that this is about gaining trust, and folks need to understand where the sources of trust are most likely, or like the levers can be pushed. And at least I find in my work that it's often government and politicians that are trusted the least. Get so much of the messaging because of the, I guess, bully pulpit of the presidency, et cetera. So it's not misintention or malintention, but that's also a struggle, right? There's a little bit of a dichotomy there that people don't have a lot of trust in the government. And then I think the active human rights violations perpetrated by the last administration, then it's like, I really don't think that you have people of color at heart. And that's something that people have to work to overcome. And that's not a flash in the pan kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's step one for me, is just that like people have to be accepting of the long haul that this requires, and also that the real investment would have been 20 years ago to have the kind of response that you wanted right now, maybe 50, maybe 100, right? Like, so this is just not overnight work.
Yeah.
And then if you're going to do that, then you make the commitment. And I think that honestly, that's becoming my approach and understanding as I get deeper and deeper into community. Like when we talk about reparations, when we talk about paying what's owed to the people who share the legacy of creating the economic structure of this country, like it's not 40 acres and a mule. You know what I mean? Like we have, and there's still this active divestment in the structures and communities that are most deserving, of having their equity, their humanity advanced and acknowledged. And this is, it's an astronomical amount, I think, of work, but it's what's right. It's what's just. And that starts with, I think, time, right? Like knowing that these are now, if it's 300 years to get to this point, this is 600 years to bring us out of it and to make it whole. That doesn't really totally answer like the pandemic question, but I think it does kind of take away maybe this idea that like we have to then like kind of push people into things that to me is just like, it just feels even worse.
Yeah, it comes with so much judgment in some ways, right?
It does, yeah.
Ignoring everything you just talked about. So it's like, what's your problem? Right?
Yes. But on a very practical level, I think it's about individual conversations, right? It's identifying the person that person has the most trust in, and seeing if you can move kind of stepwise, right? And I think we're probably, we could maybe do a little bit more in getting those folks that have already taken the vaccine to see themselves as, ambassadors, to kind of, advertise a little bit more to their friends and family that they've done it. My uncle died a few months ago, and like one of my mom's from a really small town in North Carolina, and so we had this outdoor funeral, and everybody knows everybody, right? So the person doing the officiating was like, she just got up and was like, I got my vaccine. Who, did all y'all get yours? And it just kind of, it made it, it gave it a feeling, it took the pressure off, and
And
people
it
were
was said in such
over
care. It's said in care from credible people, credible voices,
it.
right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I think, if more people felt that kind of energy, responsibility, not necessarily responsibility, again, not in this way that we're making it overwhelming for people, but just to know that could have an impact, that might change someone's mind that day, so that's where I am kind of right now, that we could be doing a little bit more as you're walking out the door with your information about side effects. Also, like, here's something you could do to share, spread the word on social media with your friends, or in your church group and things like that.
Mhm. In this last year and a half, so much has been lost. Many people have lost loved ones, and condolences to your family as well. So much has been lost, but also people have found a lot, in isolation and epiphanies. What have you lost and found?
That is a really good question. What have I lost and found? Ooh. I definitely found a sense of peace, like real peace in my family, like in my immediate family, my daughter, my husband, our little unit, because I think as a working parent, sometimes you're like, I'm failing everywhere that I'm going. Like, I'm at home, I should be working. I'm working, I should be at home. And that's well documented. And I really feel for all the working moms in particular that have really been kind of caught, by the implications of the pandemic for, everything that we've kind of come to understand that it's meant for our productivity and stuff like that. But I can just say for our little unit, everyone's been like really supportive. And maybe because, again, like, since I have this like frontline job, there's like more like, let's
The contrast.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe it's more obvious than someone who's kind of like struggling through a desk job, but for whatever reasons, it's just become a, amazingly sacred and safe space in a way that just, it's given me a lot more perspective, I think, and appreciation for the strength that they give me. So that's definitely something that I've gained. What I've lost, so definitely losing a close family member was hard, and I think that it just, it's losing our elders, and the knowledge, the peace, speaking personally, the peace that my uncle brought to our family, just that's been tough, and I see a lot of other folks struggling with that. And I think I feel it both on an individual level, but then I also I feel it on a community level, and it's hard. It's hard to see so many people, what's the best word? I don't know. I think that when we think about like excess death, for people who are at the later stages of their life, I think we have a tendency to maybe kind of create a false sense of peace about what that means, right? Like, they lived, and it's their time to go, and things like that. And I'm not like arguing against that for any one individual case, but this is a lot of people. I don't know how best to say this. I don't feel like I'm being very articulate, but and I don't think that we would have approached what has happened quite the same if it had been like a pandemic that really, really impacted like tiny babies. I guess I'm saying that all that to say that, like, I think we culturally kind of prioritize this idea of like the future life that people can have, and not necessarily give the same reverence to, the kind of conversations and communication and joy that someone who's at the later stage of their life can still like, bring into the space, into the world. And I think that's probably what I'm thinking I'm going to be, missing going forward.
Yeah, yeah. And that separation, actually, so many people, because they were isolated, came to appreciate what it meant not to hug that grandparent, and
Yeah,
what it meant not to be there for them as well, and vice versa.
absolutely.
So I'm going to have one closing question for you. So we'll end on a high note here. What do you do, as long as your answer is correct, it'll be a high note, but what do you do for self-care?
I meditate.
Yeah.
That's a big one. I try to exercise, but like I want to be better about it. I watch. I make very, very bad television choices, and I'm okay with it.
You're allowed. You're allowed.
I just finished Cheer, that's an older one. That's an older one, but like, this is where I am.
Mhm.
Yeah, at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a time where I was like, I cannot process anything heavy, anything hard.
Yeah,
It was like,
yeah.
Moesha reruns all the way. So those are probably my three. I read. I've always been a big reader. So, I think I've gone back to things that like, again, like this, I'm too busy to do this, or, I don't have time to do that. But it's like, you can make some time. So those are probably my key ones. And then obviously just, I spend as much time, with my family as I can. We go outside, we spend time on our roof, just really trying to like soak it up. Cause like you can be on these Zooms for so long,
Yeah.
and, like when's the last time that I went outside? When's the last time I got some fresh air? So another thing that I've been doing for self-care in a professional context is just like trying not to schedule back to back. You have to go someplace, like at least to another office.
Yeah.
So I saw something on the New York Times that like, they're saying like, if it's a 30-minute meeting, schedule it for 20, if it's an hour, do 45, right? So, like, oh, okay, you're catching up to where I was already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, those little things, little things really make a difference.
They really add up.
So many people are thinking right now of, what can we do to preserve the good as well, when life returns to whatever normal is going to be. Well, it's really been wonderful talking to you. Continued health to you and your family, and keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Bye.
As we live our theme of standing stronger together, we reflect on the COVID-19 pandemic and the hardships and heartache it caused for each of us and for our community. But together, we are working toward better days. Because of our collaboration with Philadelphia Fight and their work to offer free COVID testing and vaccinations to our community, over 600 COVID tests and 200 vaccinations have been administered at the Mercy Family Center. We are grateful for the partnership of Philadelphia Fight and their dedication to our neighbors. By standing stronger together, we can move forward together.
Wow, so it's been a really good and interesting last few days of programming. I really have enjoyed the interviews. What have you thought, Steve?
I enjoyed everything that we had here, and I really appreciate the voices that took the time and took part in this to support our mission and have continued to. I was especially interested, of course, in Thomas and Dr. KB's interviews, as well as our friends Jimmy and Sandy doing those, participating and interviewing them. But I think getting the word out has been very important for us, and that's what I would say that this event has been able to do.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and definitely had some great points in both of those interviews. Again, thanks to our volunteers for doing those interviews for us, and our speakers too for even being willing to participate in the programming for us, and everyone that's been a part of the Mercy programming that we've had the last couple of days. We couldn't do it without our staff, board, volunteers, everyone that's helped put this together. So we appreciate all of you and all of the work you do for Mercy every day. So again, also to our audience, thanks for tuning in the last 2 and 3 days. We really appreciate it. I think we just have a few reminders. I'm sure you've heard the last 2 days, but just some quick reminders for you guys.
Just a quick reminder to share this video with your friends and family. You can easily share the YouTube link. That's a great way to get the word out. And also follow us on social media at Mercy Neighbors on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And please be sure to click the link below. That will take you to our website where you can make a donation. We are responsible for raising $650,000 each year in the development office to fund our programs. And we have that goal set for August 31st at the end of our fiscal year. Currently, we've raised $425,000 thanks to our generous supporters, and no donation is too small. So please be sure to include as many folks as you can in spreading the word about Mercy. I think Nia and I have been talking to you at the end of each day, and I just wanted to ask Nia a question. What are you looking forward to most in the next year at Mercy when we get back to some sort of normal?
Well, I'm looking forward to the most. I mean, definitely having more people back in the center. I think we've all missed that. We obviously have some of our preschoolers and some staff, but I think just being able to see people more often and more frequently on a more normalish basis, having more kids running around, more of our normal programming, getting back to that, changing weather. I think there's just a lot of fun things on the horizon, and things to look forward to. And hopefully having some visitors too come in. I think we've missed that a lot, having people in the center with our kids, volunteers being able to help out. So hopefully in the near future, obviously being safe, that we can do that. But that's what I'm really looking forward to, just seeing people again and it being on a more consistent basis. What about you?
I agree with you. I was going to say, tell our audience here that before our shutdown last year because of COVID, we were really planning to bring more people into Mercy Family Center, because the biggest, I think, the most important thing about getting people involved with our mission is that they actually see the work being done and connect with the neighbors here. That's what drives us all to do our work every day. And I think it just connects everyone. I think Mercy is unique in the sense that our supporters and our volunteers really care about our neighbors. And I think the way that we not only, donate our money, we also donate our time, and that leads to an experience for everyone that's, our motto of transforming lives, but that comes with, I think, the back and forth and the respect that our friends, our neighbors, our families all share at the center. So when we're back, when we can be back, I'm looking forward to that as well.
Yeah, 100% agree. So we hope to see you all soon, hopefully in person, safely, of course. But again, in the meantime, follow us on social. Feel free to donate. Reach out to us here at the development department. We're here to help and answer any questions you have. But again, thank you for tuning in, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.